I had a totally different perspective when we went to Iraq, because intel in Panama had said that the majority of the Panamanian Defense Forces were not willing to fight and were going to surrender. When we went into Iraq, they told us that we were going to have a 60% casualty loss in our units, and it was going to be a totally different kind of conflict. And based on that, I didn't have a goodest feeling going into Iraq as I did when we were in Panama. But I still think that they underestimated the resolve of American troops and the resolve of the Iranians to fight.
Right. So I remember this when we're gearing up for the Gulf War, we're hearing about chemical warfare. They're going to use chemicals, so there's a good chance of that. And then also, we're hearing about what a great army the Iraqi Defense Force is, and all the Americans who are going to be coming home in body bags. And there were some Americans who came home in body bags, but not nearly what people feared.
Again, it was like in Panama. Noriega had the Dignity Brigade, and I forget what they
Was
were
it the
called. And I'm
Republican Guard? Was it
yeah,
that?
Republican Guard. And he had the Republican Guard. Well, they were all basically ones that went into Kuwait, and it wasn't the Republican Guards that they had out on the perimeters and out on the watching the borders and protecting that. That was all. Those were all conscripts. They went around town and just grabbed people off the streets and said, "You're in the army now," and sent them out in the middle of the desert to protect the homeland. Which at the time we didn't know, but um, my guys, we captured, I think, 360 some, and I use the term captured very loosely. They were all willing to surrender pretty easily, and I talked to some of them. They were on their way to the grocery store, and some of them still had their shopping lists in their pockets that they were just going to the grocery store to get groceries for their families, and they were all rounded up and put in the military. And so, yeah, they had the Republican Guard and the fighting force and I'm guessing T-72s. I don't remember the tanks they were using, and so yeah, they were again, like the Dignity Brigade. They were the elite fighting force, but the normal in the trenches soldiers were just everyday people that were just thrown there and didn't want to be there to begin with.
So you had this experience then that a lot of Gulf War vets talk about, relatively small number of US soldiers, and one of the unexpected challenges you have is you've got a wave of Iraqis coming to you surrendering, and then the problem is, what are we going to do with all these guys?
The ones that we had, we basically um, put them in a big circle and just put perimeter guards on them because they weren't going anywhere. They didn't have the desire to fight, and we were feeding them 3 meals a day, and pretty much. And I think we had them for 2 or 3 days. I don't remember how long we had them,
Yeah.
and then they were sending buses and trucks and things down to just pick them all and take them up to a bigger prisoner of war camp where they had tens of thousands of them. And so we really didn't. I didn't really have them that long, and I wasn't part of the prisoner of war documentation and classifications and all that stuff. We just basically turned them over to the people that were running the EPW camps, and we moved on.
Yeah. Would you say, I mean, did these Iraqis who surrendered to your forces, did they run the gamut of age? I mean, from teenagers to guys in their 50s or 60s?
Oh yes, I would say probably 20s. I don't recall seeing a whole lot of teenage looking kids.
Yeah.
And of course, you never know ages, but yes, they range from 20s to, yeah, mid 50s, I would say.
Yeah. Well, let's go back. How much of a lead up did you have for Desert Storm? I mean, of course, that's a situation that takes some time to unfold, and you've got to, get all the troops and all the material into theater. So how much time would you say you had to gear up for that?
I think They went into Kuwait in August,
Hmm.
if I remember right.
Yeah, that's right. August 90.
I think that we got our warning order late September, early October, because I know we had to start painting our vehicles desert sand because ours were all green. I was at Fort Riley at the time, so ours were all forest green. And so we first thing we did was started painting vehicles, and then we started getting issued desert camos and desert equipment. And so I'm guessing it was late September, early October, maybe mid October. I don't really remember for sure. And at the time, I wasn't so sure we were actually going because um, I was with the First Infantry Division, and the logistics for moving a division worth of tanks and vehicles and all that stuff to the Gulf was a major undertaking. So I wasn't really sure that they were going to actually do that. And then we got our orders that came down and said, yeah, we're going, because we had to load all our vehicles up on trains and transport them down to, I believe they went to Galveston to put them on ships. And so that's when the reality set in that, yeah, we're actually going to go
Wow.
to the Gulf when we started shipping our vehicles.
And were you military police still?
Yes.
So before you got into theater, then, what was your understanding of what your role would be?
In the combat zone, the military police are prisoners of war, direct support to infantry units, MSR security, which is main supply routes. Um, my guys did a lot of search and rescue because before the war actually started during the lull, people would get lost out in the desert at nighttime, and I would have to send people out to find people lost in the desert.
Is that because they're out there without headlights and they just kind of get lost in
Correct.
the dark in the desert?
Correct. And there's no roads and there's no landmarks either. And so you're just and that was just the advent of the GPS. I think we had one in my platoon. And so a lot of people didn't have the actual GPSs then like they do now. And so, they would get a general idea of the direction they're supposed to go, but they were still using maps and compasses for the most part during that time frame. And so people would be lost all the time out there.
So how does the search and rescue go then? Do these guys call in on the radio and say, we have no idea where we are and there's no
Pretty much,
landmark and everything is sand?
or their unit would call in and say these people are overdue by X number of hours, and we have no idea where they are. This is the direction that this is where they were supposed to be at. This is where they went to. This is where they're supposed to be coming from. And that would kind of give us a general idea of where to start going to look for them to see if we could find them.
And when the fighting actually starts, where are you staged?
I'm staged in south side of or west side of Iraq, um, inside of Saudi Arabia. And our primary function was going to be doing a flanking movement to come in behind the Republican Guard and cut them off in the Euphrates Valley. Is from what I understood, our primary goal was to do the flanking movement to cut through Iraq and get them out coming out of Kuwait City.
And did that actually happen?
Yes.
So walk us through that then. So how long does it take before your forces are in contact with the Republican Guards?
Republican Guards, I want to say hours, because we were coming in and we encountered pockets of Iraqi defense forces, but the main tank battles and the tanks that went in, I'm guessing it may have been 6 hours before they actually engaged the Republican Guard.
And did they hit the Republican Guard after getting through initial resistance from other forces?
I don't remember the valley that they were in, but they engaged a pretty decent tank battle before they actually got to the highway of death coming out of Kuwait City. And I'm not exactly sure where it was at. Um, sometimes I wasn't sure where I was at, but yeah, it was,
Uh,
it couldn't have been it couldn't have been too far from, Safwan, I think, Safwan or Basra.
oh,
I
so
don't,
yeah, southern Iraq then.
yeah, correct,
Yeah. Now, so did you went in then with you went in with your forces following the tanks,
correct.
and the soldiers you're with, you got into contact along the way?
Correct.
So how long did it take you to realize that this whole discussion about how stiff Iraqi resistance would be, that generally speaking, that was not going to be the case. There might be pockets of stiff resistance, but on the whole, not so much. How long was it before you realized that the resistance is not going to be that significant?
It didn't take long at all, because they had told us about, well, let me back up. When we first went in, they had these berms and they had these big, ditches dug, and supposedly they were supposed to be filling them full of oil that they were going to light on fire to prevent us from coming in. Well, that didn't happen. Um, once they opened up the breaches, it was just pretty much a free for all going through the breaches, and we established, my platoon established the first, um, 7 routes into Iraq, for Seventh Corps was coming up behind us, and so they had to have, and we were marking them with, you know what a chem light is?
Mhm. Yeah.
We were marking the routes with, we were putting poles in the ground and putting chem lights on the poles so that people could follow the routes of where they were supposed to be going, so that they didn't start veering left and right and start running into one another. And we went, I want to say 11 kilometers into Iraq and didn't really encounter anybody until after that. And it was shortly after that is when we actually encountered some, uh, Iraqis.
And these are Iraqis that put up some resistance?
Not really. They 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 had been bombed for what, 30 days
Oh, wow.
when the original started, and they were pretty demoralized. They were hungry. They didn't have supplies, and so I think most of them were just like the Panamanian Defense Forces, just either lost the will or had no desire to actually put up a fight anymore.
Wow. Did the forces you were with at any point come across Iraqi troops that put up at least some degree of resistance?
There was sporadic gunfire every now and then, but for the most part, they didn't want to put up a fight. When we would come across bunkers, we would make sure they were all cleared before we moved on, to make sure that there were no remaining, um, Iraqi defense forces still in fighting positions. But there was very little resistance when, as we would go through clearing them. They all had either up and run or, it's pretty much surrendered on the spot.
Wow. How long did that whole, in your memory, how long did that whole operation last before, you had the sense, okay, mission accomplished?
I would like to say about 2 days. It was pretty much, well, maybe 2 or 3 days.
Wow. Now you mentioned the Highway of Death. Did you see that?
Yes.
So, I mean, we can look up photos of the Highway of Death. But just even when you hear that phrase and you can pull up the memories in your mind, what kind of things are you seeing?
There was bodies and people and stench and destroyed, burn up vehicles and burn up people. And it was, you see the pictures, but unless you actually get the full, um, senses, all your senses, the smell and the sights and sounds and everything like that, you really don't realize how bad it really was.
Do you remember that discussion that broke out? So the conflict is over quickly, and then the discussion begins about whether U.S. forces should continue on to Baghdad and take care of Saddam Hussein now. Of course, not knowing what's coming in what, about 12 years. No way of knowing what's still 12 years in the future. Do you have any recollection of that conversation about whether, we're here, why don't we just continue to Baghdad and take out Saddam Hussein now?
I think the majority of the troops wanted to go ahead and just go and get it over with. I mean, we had the Republican Guard was on the run. We we had them dead to rights in the Euphrates Valley, and we could have just totally taken care of the whole Republican Guard at the time. And from my understanding is General Schwarzkopf and General Powell didn't want to leave, or the president, I don't know how far up the chain it went, didn't want to leave Iraq totally defenseless, which that ended up being not such a good move anyway. But I I don't think that they would have been totally defenseless anyway. And I think it would, in my personal opinion, would have been a good idea to just eliminated this threat right off the get-go. Since we were there already, we probably could have saved a lot of lives and a lot of time. But, you know, politics being what it is, there's not much you can do about, you
Yeah.
know, this is what the order is, this is where you got to stop.
Do you remember having those thoughts come 2004, 2005, when things in Iraq were getting really ugly after the invasion? Do you remember having the thoughts that, we could have taken
Yes,
care of this 12
all
years
the
ago?
time. All the time. And I think a lot of people who were there thought that, we could have solved this problem a long time ago if we'd have just eliminated Saddam Hussein back in 91.
I want to ask you a question that might be hard. I'm just throwing this at you out of the blue. But you have this experience in Panama where the people of Panama are looking for, most of them are looking for liberation from the government of Manuel Noriega. US troops come in, get him out of there. And your memory is that the people of Panama, on the whole, are pretty grateful to have him gone. So that looks like a victory. We come to the next year, 1990, well, getting into early 1991, beginning of 1991. Iraq has invaded Kuwait, all kinds of atrocities, completely unprovoked attack. American president pulls together an international coalition, pretty quickly gets Iraq out of Kuwait. You've got the people of Kuwait who don't just feel, they are liberated and they're grateful. So you've got these two kind of, you know, pretty easy victories. And then we get post 9/11, and then we get into Iraq and Afghanistan, these conflicts that just go on and on and on. And in both cases, they end up feeling a lot like Vietnam. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts, and again, this might be a bit of an unfair question, just kind of throwing this, it's kind of a cosmic question, throwing this at you out of the blue. But I wonder if you have any thoughts about how that happened. Panama was pretty clean and seems like a pretty clear success. Gulf War, pretty clean, clear success. Um, Iraq 2 and Afghanistan, they just feel like these Vietnam-like disasters.
I think the difference between the two or three, actually, Panama and the Gulf War, is they totally lacked, I think, a definitive mission. In Panama, we had a definitive mission, remove Noriega. In Kuwait, we had a definitive mission, and that was to free Kuwait. I'm not sure they really had a clear idea of what they were trying to do in Afghanistan and those places. And I think the other problem is they didn't have the political backing to just go in there and just wipe out who they needed to wipe out, like they did in Panama and Kuwait. And the other problem they had is not knowing who the enemy was.
Mhm.
And my opinion in the Middle East is those people have been fighting with one another for 2,000 years. And it's just a totally different culture than the kind of culture that we have in the Western world.
One of the things we remember about the Gulf War is just the huge outpouring of support. There's kind of this idea, this is the first big conflict we've had since Vietnam. and we need to kind of make up for what happened in Vietnam. And so, I mean, I remember I worked at a hospital, and we're writing letters to just Joe Blow soldier or a sailor. We don't know where these letters are gonna go, but just letters of support and letters of appreciation and the yellow ribbons and the parades and all of that. Do you have any? And I've talked to other Gulf War veterans who just say we were absolutely inundated with stuff that came from the States, sent from the States. Do you have any recollection of that?
Yes. I had a platoon of 23 people, and we would get boxes full of any soldier mail. And I would, at mail call, after we passed out, mail addressed to the soldiers, um, I would start passing out any soldier mail, and they just loved them, especially the ones from the kids. And for the most part, I told my guys, if you take one of these, take a second to write them back, because all you had to do was write free on your envelope, and so it didn't cost anything to mail things back to them. But yes, my guys loved all those any soldier um, letters and envelopes that came. I had one couple from Texas sent me a single use camera and wanted me to take pictures for them, and so I took pictures for them with at different areas with this camera and then sent them back to them.
Hmm.
That was interesting, and of course, goody things, um,
Cookies and candy.
cookies, candies, anything like that was always appreciated too. But yeah, it really helped the morale getting those any troop letters. It made a big difference to them. It gave them something to do. It gave them something to do, and it realized that they were being appreciated, and it gave them something to do in that they could take a minute to write some kid back, some grade school kid or some class. Sometimes it was from a third grade class in some town in Nowhereville, and try to write a class back, saying this is who I am, this is where I'm from. Uh, just introduce yourself and say, thank you for thinking about us.